So shall I start by talking? I mean, I just want this to be as interactive and useful for you all as possible. So I think feel free to, rather than me just talk at you for ages, feel free to just jump in and we can make it more of a conversation. Does that work for you guys?
Yeah.
Yep. And I'd also love to hear a bit more about you as well. But I think I'm mainly here to talk about what an agent does. Have you had any agent guests yet for this round?
Not for this one, no.
Okay, cool. It's just good to know the level of knowledge. But basically, a literary agent is quite a funny job in publishing, in that it's sort of, when I'm asked to define what we do, sometimes I feel like the question should be, what don't we do? So our job is to find talented writers whose work that we love, and to sell it to a publisher. That's the kind of very bare bones of the job. So it's a sales job on the one hand, but also it's an advocacy job. So our job is to advocate for our authors and to fight for you and to look after your interests and make sure that is always a priority in the conversation we're having with publishers. So I like to say that we are on your side, and we are by your side, and we're here to step in often when things go wrong sometimes. We're always championing our writers, so that's professionally when we're talking to editors or our peers and other contemporaries in the industry, but also in our personal lives. You know, there's nothing better than and more incredible than going into a bookshop with a friend or a partner and seeing your author's book on the bookshelf, and or maybe talking to friends and family and they mention a book to you and it turns out to be one of your own books or by one of your own authors and they didn't know. And so that's kind of the essence of it. It's quite I like to call the industry a bit of an industrial complex industry. It's like it's very opaque, the industry, and it's hard to it's not a very transparent industry, so it's quite hard to know as an author what's going on. There's a lot of lingo and jargon that's often exchanged that if you're not in the know can be hard to kind of decipher and translate. So part of my job is also to make that clearer for my authors and to explain what exactly is going on. So obviously we can't do anything if we don't have any authors or books, so we represent what we tend to call in the industry a list. So my list is fiction and non-fiction. I'll talk about that a bit more later. But we have to find you guys, the writers, and that can be anywhere and everywhere at a very sort of superficial level. It could be through unpublished writers prizes, reading anthologies from creative writing courses, going out to industry events and talking to people like you guys. Often it's word of mouth. Often our writers will come in by way of recommendation from other writers or authors or people in the industry. So I'm really looking for writers anywhere and everywhere. It comes down to me reading the book and your writing and loving it and wanting to work with you and us having a really good rapport. The relationship is very much centered around trust. It's a funny one because it's both a very personal relationship, but it's also a professional business relationship. You pay us to get you a publisher and to make sure that you're getting a great deal and a good contract and good royalties and terms. More of that later. So to go back to what it means to sell your work to a publisher, I think the first place to start is that we're often the first readers of the work. So you might have shared your manuscripts with friends and family, but we might be the first industry person to look at that work, and we assess it in line with, most importantly, our tastes. And it's how we respond to the book, to the story, to the voice, to characters, but also we have to feel in our bones, and this is not unrelated to how we feel about the work, and that's why that love and passion is so important, but we have to feel like we can actually sell it to a publisher, that there is an editor out there who will want to acquire that book and that can see a readership for it. And that's not unproblematic, and that makes a very high barrier to entry, and that's a whole other thing to talk about, the diversity or lack thereof of the industry and the books that we publish. So yeah, once we've found and signed our writers, we put together a very bespoke list of editors who we think would love it, as much as we do. And that's through, we are always meeting publishers and editors every day. I mean, it's been a bit stymied by the situation, but usually we're having meetings with, I'd probably have meetings with about 2 or 3 editors every week, and that might be coffee. It's face to face, it tends to be, but sometimes phone calls as well. And we're always talking about gossip, obviously, but also what's going on in the industry, what books are being bought and sold, what books are being published, what books have done well, what books haven't done well and why, what books we would love to find, what books we've loved reading, the zeitgeisty books, the books we think are overrated. And it's through those conversations that we get a sense of each other, and get a sense of each other's tastes, and that again is kind of how trust is built up. And an editor might say to me, oh, I'm looking for the next, I don't know, I just saw this group's called Zadie, so white teeth, for want of a cliche example. And I'd say, oh my God, Zadie Smith's one of my favorite writers too. How great. Well, that I'll definitely, if I ever find something like that, I'll send it to you. And so that's where we bring our experience and knowledge of the industry and the people in the industry, because it really is a people industry, to put together what I think would be an amazing submission list for your novel. And that's not going to be everyone, because people do have really different tastes. But it's going to be, and that's a long project, and it begins with taking you on and actually pitching your books in those meetings with editors. So I might have that with that same editor say, oh my God, actually I've just taken on a writer who's writing a novel that's very much in the same space as White Teeth, so I think you would love that. And that might be a year before I end up sending it to them. It could be 2 years before that book's ready to send to them. So it really is the long game, and these things don't happen overnight. And there's it's a very thoughtful process, and it's often a very invisible process that people aren't really aware of, because I think the joy of my job and why I love it is that I'm very much in the background. I'm in the wings, and I'm not the center stage. That's not what I'm about. I'm about making things happen, but not doing it in a kind of flashy way. You just do it in those conversations you have, talking about books, which is why it's such a wonderful job. So once we have put together that list, and I've got 5 editors I think would really like to see your book. It could be 5, it could be 20. I send it to them, they think about it, they want to make an offer, and that's again a really amazing experience, and it can be very overwhelming. So my job's to be on hand to talk you through that whole process and to hold your hand through that, and to make sure that you're helping you to, I can't make the decision for you, but it would be about helping you to make an informed decision about who you think would be the best person to publish your book. That's if we have more than one offer to contend with. So I manage that whole process for you, and I negotiate the offer for you. And that's about the advance, which is, as I'm sure you've seen recently on the conversations, it's an advance against royalties. It's the money you get paid before the book's published to essentially sustain you through that period where you're writing and editing your book. That's why it's an advance, because once it's published, the publisher then on every sale needs to earn back that advance before you start getting royalties, which is a percentage of each copy of the book. So say we had an offer or 2 on the table, I would talk to you about the editor, that we would have conversations with the editor and about their vision, editorial vision, as well as their publishing vision for their book. What is their strategy for getting the book to the retailers, and through the retailers to the readers? What's their publicity plan? What's their marketing plan? And that'll be a conversation that we would usually have in person, in flesh, with the editor. We'd go into the publishing house and we would talk to them about it, but sometimes it can also be had over the phone, and obviously now it's done all over the phone. And you would get a sense of the editor themselves as a person, as well as their strategy for the book. And there's lots of different things that need to be taken into account when you're making that decision. And yeah, I'm on hand to basically answer any questions and counsel you through that process. It is quite an overwhelming process. So say you got the deal of your dream, you're being published by Penguin or whatever, you're then on this path with the editor to getting your book into tip-top shape to be published. So that's editorial, and we would have done a lot of, usually, I mean, I'm a very hands-on agent. I like to work editorially with my writers very closely. That could be one draft, it could be 10 drafts. The idea is to get it into the best possible shape for an editor to then do the work that they want to do on it as well. So yes, it really depends on where the manuscript's at, and some manuscripts require more work than others, and it's a collaborative process. At the end of the day, it's your book. I'm not going to make you do anything I don't want you to do, but it's also about making sure that we as a team feel that this is a really, really strong manuscript. You know, editors are receiving dozens of manuscripts every day, and they only have however many slots in the year to publish, you know, however many books. It could be, it's usually about 10 to 12 hardback books a year per editor, but I mean that's a very arbitrary figure, but that's just to give you an example. They might publish one hardback book and hardback a month, and then they've got their paperbacks from other years and maybe other titles they're looking after. So, you know, they receive hundreds of submissions from agents every year, and they can only pick 12 books to publish next year. So you really only get one shot to knock their socks off, and they're going to read that book once and that's it. So it might be that I take you on today, but the book's not actually ready for another 18 months to send to editors. So yeah, I really see my role as often the first reader of that work and an early editor. Obviously I don't do that final editing, but I'm also, I think I want my writers to feel like they trust my editorial opinion. So even if you're further on down the process with the editor, I'm still always there to read and feedback on that. But really where I like to get my teeth into is that very early stages when the manuscript might be quite raw. That's what's really exciting for me. Yeah, so yeah, and then generally I'm a sort the I'm a kind of long-term career manager, talent manager type thing. I mean, that's not a very glamorous way of putting it, but the idea is that I take you on for the book that you have ready, the manuscript you have ready, but it's also a long-term investment. You know, many debuts, it's the irony of the kind of flashiness of big debut books is that usually you get better with every book, and sometimes you don't find success, critical or commercial, until the 5th, 6th, 7th book. So the idea of an agent is to stand by you with every book and to try and think creatively about what the next book might look like, to brainstorm with you, and again to do that really close editorial work with you to make sure that book 2, 3, 4 you can continue to see success through your subsequent work, not just that first book. So yeah, it's to think holistically about your career and that trajectory, and again it's usually the long game, and yeah, and then a corollary to that is about maximizing your income from your writing. I mean, most of my writers do have other jobs. As you know, it's hard to make a living full-time as a writer, sadly, these days, but having an agent, signing to an agency that has the resource to try and maximize, you know, UK, I mean, it's very boring, but the UK book advances alone is not enough to really make a career. But where you can make more money is from subsidiary rights, so foreign rights sales, a sale to the US, film and TV rights sales. And really, I've just moved to an agency called David Heim. We're a big agency. We offer all of that in-house. So it's really great having that, you know, my colleagues there who are literally employed to do that for your work. Smaller agencies obviously would like to be able to do that, but they're not often set up to do that, so they outsource it to co-agents, which is still better than nothing, but it's not the same as having your own bespoke film and TV agent who's going to sell your book to Netflix, for example. But yeah, the overall idea is that we hope to be able to make you money through your writing in whatever shape or form that is. So that's yeah, that's really important to us. And we don't earn money unless you earn money. We work on commission. So you should never be charged upfront any fees for agent services. It's taken off your earnings. So we negotiate the deal with the publisher. They pay you, they pay us your advance. We take our percentage and then we pay it to you. And that's standard across the board. Yeah, I think that's the kind of top and tail of it, and we can dig into whatever might be interesting for you. I kind of want to hear what you're interested in and hear what you're working on and what your questions might be. And things might occur along the way that I've missed, but that's the general gist.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Nikki. So I'll open up to you guys. Raz, do you have anything that you want to say?
Sorry, did you say me?
Yeah.
I had a really dumb question.
Which,
how do you pick an agent? Or like, how does that process happen? Like at the beginning?
That's a great question.
That's a really good question.
How are you calling that dumb?
So it's so difficult. It's where should I start with this? So the main thing, like with any relationship, personal or professional, it's based on trust, and you have to feel, I'd say we all offer the same kind of service in that, you know, we all know the same publishers and we meet the same editors every day, and we really value those relationships we have with editors. So in a general sense, what we offer is the same. It's not like we have different terms and therefore you're going to get a better deal somewhere else. So then what it comes down to is the rapport and chemistry you have with the agent. Do you feel like they get your work? Do they get you? Do they get what you want to do, what your ambitions are, what you want to achieve with your writing, not just with this book, but in the long term, like 2, 3, 4, next 5, 10, 20 years. And then it's about, I think the agency is quite important. So in terms of the agent, you can look at their list. You can see what kinds of writers they represent. You can see what they'll put a little bit about their tastes in their biography on their profile page. And that should give you a little flavour. It's not the same as meeting the person, but obviously if you're just querying people, that's the steer that we give to people. And, you know, we try to think about how we phrase and write that copy so that, you know, you can get a sense. And I think the kind of obvious answer that people say is like, look at your favorite contemporary writers and books and look at who represents those books. But I think it's easy to get carried away. But, you know, I'm at the beginning of my career. I've been working in the industry for 5 years. I'm young. My list is open. I'm passionate about finding new voices and developing them. If you look at Zadie Smith's agent, like, of course she's amazing, but she's much further on in her career. She's much more established. She's going to have a much fuller list. And maybe, rightly or wrongly, I don't know, sometimes what happens is these agents are incredibly busy and they already represent 100 clients. So it's about thinking about how much of a priority are you going to be for that person? How willing are they to give up their time to develop you? And it's so easy to get, when you have more than one offer of representation, which happens, and agents are fighting for you, it's easy to, and I'm biased obviously, but I can only speak from experience, it's easy to kind of think, oh my God, like that agent's like the most prestigious agent there is, I'm just going to go with them, even though maybe I don't connect with them on such a personal level, like they represent the best writers out there, so I'm going to go with that. At the end of the day, you have to make the right decision for you and your career and your book, and no one can tell you otherwise. But I do think there's a lot to be said for just that kind of ineffable chemistry you might have with someone. And I think ultimately the most important thing is the way they respond to your work. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Did that answer your question, Red?
Yeah.
Cool. Catty, do you want to read your question out?
I just forgot what I've written as well. Okay, yeah. Excuse me. I was just wondering what to initially contacting an agent, what would they expect to see from a potential writer first? I mean, I've been told before that if, say, you're writing a non-fiction book, they'd want to you to have the complete draft? Is that the same thing for a fiction book? I mean, I've heard different things before, so I'm a bit like, would it matter, for example, if you're writing a novel and you haven't quite finished it yet, but you've got enough, say like you're 50% through, would that be enough to approach an agent with, or would you expect to have at least that first draft done?
Well, I'm not sure what you've heard from who, but fiction is the one that you have to have the finished manuscript for 99% of the time. And non-fiction is the one that we as agents sell on what we call on proposal to the publisher. So you don't need to have written the whole manuscript, but you need to have a really great proposal, which is basically an overview / introduction summary of the book, a very clear sense of the structure of the book. So how the chapters are broken down, and then a sample chapter or two. So that might be the introduction of the book in chapter 1, or an extract from chapter 4. And it might be kind of, as a document as a whole, it could be anywhere between 10 and 20,000 words. But for fiction, generally speaking, you need to have written the whole book. I wouldn't suggest sending 50% of a book if you're querying agents cold. There are exceptions, like for example, if you pitched it to me now and I was like, oh, that sounds really interesting, I might ask you to send me the first 30 pages. You'll see on each agency website, they do put instructions on how to submit, and they specify very clearly what that should look like. And usually it is, for fiction, a cover letter, which is a little bit about you, and a book, and the book. I'd pitch that's kind of your opportunity to pitch the book, as well as kind of add in any writing credentials. So that might be where you've been published, or what awards you've won, or you've done rewrite, things like that. You really need to, that will really boost you up. And then it will say usually the first 3 chapters, or the first 30 pages, or the first 10,000 words, or the first 50 pages. So it's basically the opening of your book we'd want to see. And then as agents, the reason we do that is that we don't have time to read the full manuscript of every single submission we get. I've only just started at my new agency, and I'm getting 30 submissions a week. So basically what we do is we ask for the first 3 chapters, we read them, if we like them, then we request the full manuscript for fiction. For non-fiction, I think it varies from agency to agency, but I'd usually like to see the proposal and then some sample material from the book itself. But I don't know if you guys are writing non-fiction, but it's quite a sort of complicated, different conversation, which we can talk about more
I think everyone here, no one's doing non-fiction here, except for Jeanette, who's not here. Are you doing non-fiction?
You're on mute.
You're on mute, love.
There's a book I'm working on.
How many books you working on?
You said to pre-write.
Okay, so you have a non-fiction book that you want to do as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool, brilliant. Do you have any more specific questions to non-fiction, Aisha?
No, Jenny, she just answered what I was going to ask actually about non-fiction. So
okay.
Yeah, memoirs again slightly different, and it depends on the kind of memoir. But if you take memoir which is more like fiction, so that's written more like a novel, I think we can probably treat it as a fiction submission. So something like uneducated. I don't know whether the agent sold that on the whole manuscript, but it wouldn't do any harm in having that whole book, because it's a bit more like a novel, if you see what I mean. Whereas if it's like a Rennie Edo Lodge type book, a proposal would probably suffice. You wouldn't need the whole book.
Cool, brilliant. Okay, Grace, do you want to read your question out?
So I was wondering if you could share your perspective on poetry, so publishing poetry, what your experience has been with that.
So I represent a few poets. I represent Raymond Antrobus, who's an amazing poet.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh my God, you're his agent? Oh my God, I had no idea.
Another brilliant poet called Will Harris, whose book Rundown was published by Granta, and Nikita Gill, who's big on Instagram. She's great. I would say for the most part, I'm interested in representing poets who are also writing prose. Poetry is a small community, as you probably know, and the options for publishing are quite limited. You need to be pretty established before you can get a publishing deal. So if you're a poet and you are interested in writing more poetry and getting publishing a book, a collection eventually, I think the first step is to get published in publications, in well-regarded poetry publications first of all. Again, everyone's finding their own way now, and I think that's what's been so powerful about social media. It's given us a different kind of platform. So it really depends on the kind of poetry you're writing. You know, Raymond came from a spoken word slam background, but is also a page poet. So there are different ways. I'm not by no means an expert, and I think really what's so impressive and heartening about poetry is the community that's there. So I think it is about tapping into that community if you're not already plugged in. I'm sure you are, and then kind of going from there and slowly putting together a collection, but also thinking about other possibilities for your writing, prose, for example.
That makes sense, Grace?
Yes, thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, Maribel, do you want to read out your question?
Yeah. So, what key things do you look out for in an initial submission, and how would you determine who you take on? So, like the do's and don'ts of what you look out for.
Yeah, good question. It's interesting because I receive so many submissions every day, so I really take it for granted that people know how to put together a submission. But I think the key things are to showcase you as a writer and your work in the best, most impressive way in your cover letter. So at Higham, we again, you just look at the instructions because everyone has different specifications, but what I would expect is the cover letter would be in the email. So you'd say, "Dear Nikki, we recently met at Rewrite and I want to submit you my book. Here's a bit about the book and a bit about me." So when you're talking about your book, it's really hard writing about your own book. I don't envy you guys, but it's a kind of mix between what you would find on the back of a book, like the book blurb. So you want to make it really arresting. The copy has to like grab the reader's attention, like I was picking up the book in a bookshop. That's the kind of thing that I would want to. It's quite short and punchy. You don't want to go into a lengthy synopsis about what every plot point and character. That's for the synopsis. I don't really care for synopsis that much. Like, I don't really read them. I don't really want to know about the book before I read it. So it's about conveying to the reader / agent the what's the word? It's pitching the book, a flavour of the kind of style it's written in, as well as comparative titles. So that is a big thing in our industry. The way books are sold are basically by comparing them to other books, which sometimes does my head in, but sometimes can be really useful. It's just finding those communal sort of touch points, reference points for the person you're talking to. So if I'm pitching a book to the editor, I might say it's Juno Diaz meets Bridget Jones. So, and then they'll think, okay, that's quite an unusual mix. I kind of get the vibe. And I think it's really important for writers when they're debut writers, when they're thinking about their work, to think about what books you want your book to sit next to in the bookshop. And again, it's hard. I mean, it's aspirational as well, and we appreciate that. But it also gives us a good steer of what you want to achieve with your writing. It's basically talking about your influences and inspirations, and also demonstrates a sort of sense of how you want your book to be positioned. Again, it's not binding in any way, and also you might think of it you might pitch it in a certain way. I might read it and totally disagree with you, but at least it gives me a sense of how you see yourself as a writer and how you see your voice. And then lastly, about you. I don't need to know how many dogs and cats you have, but I do need to know whether you have graduated from a creative writing course or program or whatever. I need to know whether you've been published. I need to know whether you've been shortlisted for anything. anything that's relevant to you as a writer, I need to know about, and that will catch my eye when I'm reading that. Most people don't have any of those, aren't lucky enough to have enjoyed any of those opportunities. And it's not really fair that is what we look for. But given that we're so time poor and receiving so many submissions, we're trying to look for people who already have some sense of themselves as a writer in the community. That's not to say I wouldn't just write someone off because they weren't published, or they weren't shortlisted for dyslexia, or blah blah blah, or the Bain Forth State Short Story Prize. But it helps, and that's why those things are set up, to try and give some recognition to writers at the very earliest stages of their career.
Okay.
Brilliant, thank you. Rahma, do you want to go for your question? And then Catty, you've got a question as well, so we'll follow up with that. So Rahma, do you want to go ahead?
So I wrote, how do you know when a writer is ready for the work to be published, and how can a writer prepare themselves for the process? Only because it seems so daunting, and I feel like it's a lot different now compared to how it was before, and in the sense that there's no anonymity, and like seeing your critique online, all those things. So what things can I do to prepare myself for that?
So what was the first part of your question?
Sorry. How do you know when a writer is ready for their work to be published?
So that's a really good question. I think if I take on a writer and we do some work together, I think we both have to feel like you can't do any more at this stage. I don't want to tire you out with 20 drafts, ideally, because you're going to go and do more work with the editor. But at the same time, it's a balance between making sure that this is going to catch an editor's attention. They're going to want to spend good money on it, and giving you a bit of space, not wearing you out too much before you embark on that next process. And, don't want you to fall out of love with writing. So it's a decision that we make together, really. It's not going to be perfect. No book is perfect. It's not going to be perfect when we send it out. There's going to be more work to be done, but I think it's a conversation that I would have with the writer about, we might get to draft 4 and I might think, oh God, I could do another few more rounds with you, but actually I've got to, it's a trade-off between spending yet more time working on it with no guarantee of reward or success, and letting it go out into the world and trusting that actually, even if an editor wants to do more work on it, they're going to see the potential in it, and they can convince their colleagues that this is a worthy investment. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, when you're sending a book to a publisher, the editor will love it and want to buy it. They still need to get the buy-in from the rest of their company to take that book on. So it needs to jump through so many hoops before the editor can even make us an offer. So that's a conversation I'm very upfront about having when I'm offering representation to someone. I might say, I think this is incredible and has a lot of potential, but I still think it's X amount of drafts off. Are you prepared? Firstly, do you agree with the work that I suggest we do? More character development with this character. Let's pare back this bit. Or have you thought about changing this thing around? So we have to be in agreement on our editorial vision for the book, but also, are you prepared to do the work? It's going to be another 6 months, it's going to be another year. How much time do you have? Are you willing to commit your evenings and weekends to this? And again, like, all of this work is unpaid for both of us. It's this promise, like, it's this belief that I have that this book needs to be out in the world, and readers need to be able to buy it and read it. How to prepare for it's daunting. Well, hopefully, part of my job is to reassure you, you're not the first person to have done this. You won't be the last. It's going to be okay. It's going to be difficult. There's going to be challenges, but I'll be here for you, by your side, like I said, and, trying to make this as easy a process for you as possible. And it's also the editor's job to do that with you as well, and to support you through the process of getting published. So it's really, we're your kind of champions and cheerleaders, and the editor is as well. So they represent your book within their company to the publisher as a whole, and then to the wider world, to the retailers, to the booksellers, and then to the readers. So my job's to do that internally within the publishing industry, and the editor's job is to do that externally, sort of in the public arena, as well as their company.
Brilliant, thank you. And then for Catty's question, specific writing competitions that you as an agent pay attention to? I think you've already mentioned Dyslexia and the BAME Short Story Prize.
Yeah, there's so many, and I wish I had more time to sort of be more rigorous. I have quite a few writers who have been on the White Review Short Story Prize. That's a very literary prize, and its counterpart, its non-fiction counterpart, the Fitzcarraldo Prize. But there are honestly so many. There's smaller ones, and they're no less valuable in submitting to. Some are more expensive to submit to than others. But I would say if you're starting out, start small and then slowly grow from there. I mean, I wouldn't go for the Sunday Times Short Story Prize straight away, because that is very, very competitive, and usually it's like extremely experienced writers get longlisted for it, until you're feeling really confident and maybe you've got a couple of long listings under your belt already. But good old Google, there's so many different prizes, and it's just about getting yourself out there and submitting and getting as much feedback on your work as possible.
Is there any that you in particular always sort of look out, like think, oh, who's in this one this year, that you always go back and pay attention to? Seeing as there's so many, or
the runs I've already mentioned. So Fourth Estate, BAME Short Story Prize, the White Review. God, off the top of my head. Those are there's V.S. Pritchett, a few more. I mean, there's kind of 5 to 10 very famous ones, and all the agents look at that. I can't remember any off the top of my head besides the ones I just told you. Commonwealth Short Story Prize.
a friend of mine won that a few years ago.
Oh, cool. And there's the Bridport Spread the Word, do the London Short Story Prize. So I wish I could say I was more across all of them than I am in reality. But yeah, agents are always looking at those lists, so you'll get some attention if you get longlisted onto that shortlisted.
Brilliant. What 3 things, or what would your 3 tips be for somebody who thinks that they're ready to submit to an agent? Like, so what are the things that they should be doing before submitting to the agent, and also how would someone know that they're ready for their work to go to an agent? Because as you said, it's the first person who's going to see it, and you guys are looking at like 30 stories per week, 30 submissions. You kind of want that to be the best submission. So how do you know when you're ready, and what should you do before submitting?
Yeah, I mean, I can't answer that question. How do you know when you're ready, apart from it be you really feeling like you can't do anymore? It really is your best work. I would not send anything in that I thought that was less than 100% effort, and I really couldn't take it any further on my own. Having said that, before you get to that point, I would have expected you, hopefully, to have shared it with trusted readers. So that might be a partner or a friend who reads voraciously, whose taste and judgment you trust. And I would get your writing groups are fantastic communities for getting that feedback, and basically making sure that you've taken on board, or at least thought about and considered all that you want to get honest, genuine feedback. It's so easy to share work with friends, and no one wants to say, oh, I didn't like it, so they just say, yeah, it's really good. But I think where you're going to make the most progress is from the more difficult conversations that might be along the lines of, oh, I didn't really understand that bit, it was really confusing, like I don't know, why is that random character in there, or I couldn't really get into that character. And it's really painful to receive that for the first time, but as long as they're trusted people, it's coming from a genuine place as a reader. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm just a reader, and I'm responding to the words on the page and the story that's being told, and I can't do any more or less than that. And yes, sometimes people can be more tactful at giving feedback than others, and part of my job is to be able to have really constructive conversations about where I think a manuscript isn't working, and it's not easy, and it can be they can be quite fraught conversations, and oftentimes a writer might really really strongly disagree with me, but then actually go away and think about it for a few days, and then they'll call me and say, oh, actually, Nikki, you're totally right about that, sorry. It's just, or vice versa, I might suggest something and I might get it wrong, and I can only respond subjectively at the end of the day. There's no hard and fast rules about it. But I would, in terms of querying agents, it has to be, you have to feel like this is you only get one shot.
Mm-hmm.
To really feel like it's the best that you can do right now with the tools you have, and then hopefully a switched on and engaged agent it might be that it's flawless and I don't have to touch it at all, but usually there is some way we can go to making it an even better draft before I send it out to publishers.
Brilliant. Okay, any final questions?
Yes, actually.
Go ahead.
So say you have this, you've got to that point, you thought, yeah, sent it to an agent, and maybe would you send one by one, or is it expected that you'd send to a few and then see who connects with you?
There's lots of different ways of doing it, but I'd collate a list of your top 10, and then it might more 10, 7 maybe, I don't know, and then do a first round of like your ideals. You do it simultaneously. I wouldn't do it one by one, because that creates a kind of level playing field. And then the etiquette is usually, if someone reads your manuscript and requests the full manuscript, you then let the other agents know, because then it will boost that manuscript after everything. We know there's competition, we're very competitive. So it's really important to do that, and no joking around about that, because we there are some pranksters, not pranksters, but what's the word, like people who have pretended that there's interest, and we all talk to each other and we know, and that will always backfire. So I mean, I don't doubt that any of you wouldn't do that, but if there's a genuine interest from another agent, it's good to let the other agents know, because then we'll all sit up and pay attention. If you don't get anything, then I would probably create a sort of tier 2 and maybe a group B list of like maybe less preferable, not your dream agents, but other agents who might be interested, and then I would try them. So just be sort of strategic about it. Wouldn't overwhelm yourself with sending it out to 50 agents at one go. I think just pick a handful of people whose lists you really love, and also the other thing I should say is try and make each letter bespoke. So you won't believe the number of times that I've received a submission that says "Dear Sirs" or "Dear Mr. Charles," and that agent died like 10 years ago. I mean, it's just staggering. And so just put a personal touch onto each letter, and personalize it. And there's no harm in mentioning, again, we like to be flattered, a couple of authors that you've read or think are interested, or like I might have mentioned I like this book, and like I also love this author. That's a really great way to show that you've engaged with what it is we do and what we're passionate about.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, any final questions from people? Final remarks?
Looking for anyone now?
What's that?
Are you looking for
anyone now?
Oh yeah, so tell us about your list. So you've mentioned some poets already. What sort of fiction?
So I represent everything. I haven't talked much about how I got into it, but I worked at my first job was at an agency called Aiken Alexander Associates. It's a very old school prestigious agency, got this sort of insane list, and I started in the film and TV department, so I have a good grounding in book to screen. So I helped to sell film rights essentially in our authors' books, and I also did a lot of audio, and that's a really booming area of the market right now. And I assisted Claire Alexander there, who's the main agent. She's this big shot, and I also began to build my own list, and then I moved to, and that was, this was years ago, before diversity was so trendy, although it always is sort of trendy. And obviously, for obvious reasons, I was interested in the voices that I wasn't seeing. It was at the time, this was 5 years ago, it was an incredibly white list. I remember doing a count, and there was like 400 writers that the agency represented, and there were like 5 Black writers, maybe less, and then maybe another 5 to 10 other non-Black people of color.
Aisha, your face is like, but this is literally the publishing industry. Like this is.
And they've diversified a lot now, which is good. And I think everyone's very aware of the need to do so. There's a lot of sort of, but I'm cynical, and it is. I mean, it's. I could talk about it for ages, but I know I don't need to, and you guys understand. But anyway, so I was already, my list was already diverse, and then I moved to the Good Literary Agency, whose specific mission was to represent diverse writers, so writers of color, queer, disabled, and working class writers, no non-diverse writers. And that just it was such an easy fit because I was already doing that. So the writers who I represented at Aiken Alexander came with me because they were all diverse anyway. So I did that for 2 years. It was a small company, a start-up company, social enterprise, Arts Council funded, so very different operation from the old agency. It was complete. My first day was like, okay, so what do you want to do? Set up the company in the way that you want, and it was incredible, not without its challenges. And then so I did that for 2 years, and then I just recently moved to an agency called David Heim, which is another old prestigious agency. I think it's 85 years old. It's much bigger than Aiken Alexander, and it's got this amazing in-house, like I said, foreign rights team and film and TV rights team, and it has this illustrious list of authors from Roald Dahl and Jackie Wilson to white English writers like Graham Greene and Muriel Spark, and all these kind of canonical figures, which is interesting, I think. And it's nice to have that history. I think actually it's been interesting starting a company from scratch versus joining a company that's more established. And I certainly feel like I have much more resource at my disposal. Obviously at the Good Agency we had this amazing mission, but we also had no money, and like I had to do everything from basically that went way beyond what the literary agent does, to do with like administrating and running the company, which is fine, but it just took me away from what I really wanted to do, which was working with diverse writers. So I moved over to David Heim in April under lockdown. Quite weird, haven't met most of my colleagues, brought all my writers with me. So they all left TGLA to come with me to David Heim. And as I've said before, I'm still looking for writers. Obviously it's very busy. I think I've got 30 writers on my list, and they range across fiction, non-fiction, poetry. In fiction, I'm interested in more, again, arbitrary publishing lingo, but more literary fiction. So I love writers like Zadie Smith, Ishiguro. I love Latin American writers like Garcia Marquez and Borges, but I also love Baldwin and Toni Morrison. I would say I have quite broad taste.
Cool.
But I don't represent that much commercial genre fiction. But there are loads of my brilliant colleagues I have who do that. And then on the non-fiction side, again, like I'm interested in political writing. It will usually be about race or politics or culture, society, academics, journalists, people writing memoir, a real, like even lifestyle and cookery. I love cookery and food writing.
Yeah, I've seen that on your Twitter.
yeah. So a bit of I'm quite broad in the non-fiction space, but I would say, which is good for you guys, I am looking mainly for fiction writers at the moment. Although I get a lot of submissions, it's hard to find something that I really fall in love with. And actually the most important thing at the end of the day is that I find a submission and I love it, and I just have to work with the writer. That's why we do our jobs, basically.
Brilliant, thank you, Nikki. And then for people to submit to you, is it just via the website?
Yeah, so we have our
process.
there's a submissions page there, and it's quite straightforward and easy.
Cool.
Any more questions?
Okay, Nikki has to go. So do we have any more questions? No, everybody's smiling, which is good.
It's helpful. Yeah, I can't wait to read your novels.
Yeah, that was brilliant. Thank you so much, Nikki. We're going to continue now,
Okay.
but yeah, I will follow up with an email. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you doing this for us today.
Cheers.
Thank you.